All right. Thank you so much, everybody, for being here today. My name's Erin. I'm the patient support manager at Craig's Cause Pancreatic Cancer Society. Without further ado, we're really excited to have Dawn Richards here today. I'm just going to read here. Dawn Richards is the founder of 502 Labs Incorporated and director of patient and public engagement at Clinical Trials Ontario, with a PhD in analytical chemistry from the University of Alberta and experience in a variety of roles over the past 20 years. It is her diagnosis with rheumatoid arthritis in 2006 that started her journey to combine her passion for science with making the most of her diagnosis. In her role at CTO, Dawn is charged with executing on CTO's strategic pillar of patient and public engagement. Dawn has contributed to the literature and practice in patient engagement around compensation of patient partners, authorship with patient partners, authorship with patient partners, recognizing patients as people with various skills who lead fulfilling lives, and education around patient engagement and research. As a volunteer, Dawn is vice president of the Canadian Arthritis Patient Alliance and a member of the BMJ's Patient Advisory Panel. So we're so excited to have you here today, Dawn. Thank you so much for taking the time. And I will just hand it over to you.
Okay, thanks a lot, Erin. It's really a great privilege for me to be here with you. I think I maybe recognize some of you from a webinar that we did, maybe I forget the time, but it was within a few months. So if you were at that webinar about the basics of clinical trials, I'm not expecting everyone to remember all the details. So we'll talk a little bit about some of the basics still, but we're going to focus a little bit more on finding and accessing clinical trials and what some of the things mean if you're interested in looking for a clinical trial, what some of the databases look like if you want to search for things on your own. So I hope that you come away with understanding some of the basic information about clinical trials. And maybe if you have been at a past webinar with me, it solidifies some of those things or even introduces you to some new things. As I mentioned, we're going to kind of focus on if you're interested in looking for a trial, and again, what some of the terms mean when you start to look for things, and maybe some of the questions that might be helpful for you to think about in your own situation as well. Really important to talk a little bit about kind of your responsibilities as someone participating in a clinical trial, and really your rights as well, that you can choose to leave, you can choose to volunteer to participate, and we'll go over some of those things too with you. So Erin mentioned that I'm part of a not-for-profit organization called Clinical Trials Ontario. It's mostly funded by the government of Ontario, where we're based. And there are 3 strategic priorities. And so my work falls under this engage pillar. Really, CTO is about making Ontario a better place to do clinical trials. And while I'm from an Ontario-based organization, anything that I'm going to talk about today is applicable all across Canada to clinical trials, because clinical trials are regulated by Health Canada, our federal regulator. And to be quite honest, much of what I'm going to talk about is applicable to clinical trials anywhere. So there's some founding principles related to doing clinical trials. And so a lot of what I'll talk about is pretty much applicable wherever you are. If you're interested in learning more beyond what I've talked about at this presentation, you can visit our website. There's a QR code and a link. I'm also happy to share the slides after we chat so that Erin can share them with you. And I wanted to let you know that all of the work that I do at CTO is in partnership with people who consider themselves patients. Some of them have participated in clinical trials themselves. I have as well. Some of them are just interested in research and helping bring research to other people. And they live with a variety of different conditions. So the focus of our work as a group isn't about any one specific condition. It's really about trials themselves. But everything that you see on the website in the Learn More sections has been co-created with patients or participants helping us. So first we'll talk about some of the basics of trials. I'm not going to go into too much depth about them, but just want to give you a reminder that clinical trials are research. And so that's important to understand that they are a form of experiments. I know that sometimes people will seek them out as a form of treatment that can be really personal for you, but they're not intended necessarily to be treatments. They are research. They do, in that research, test what we call interventions, and they help us understand about the outcomes related to those interventions. Really, intervention, you can just substitute the word treatment there, or therapy, right? We're just looking at different treatments and therapies. And we design clinical trials specifically in different ways to answer questions. So we might be looking at the safety of an intervention. We might be looking at if that therapy improves or cures a disease, or maybe helps people live longer or improves their quality of life. So we can look at different things in trials. And we often will talk about interventions being drugs, but they can be other things too. So they can be devices, they can be a new type of surgery, they might be radiation therapy, they might be things like imaging or other diagnostic procedures. They can be things like diet and lifestyle as well. And we might be testing one intervention on its own or in combination with others. So again, you'll see clinical trials looking differently in different disease spaces, as well as looking at different combinations of things. So we do clinical trials because we're seeking out evidence about things. So we're essentially looking for research data about the intervention that's being studied. And the data that we gather and the results that we gather help a whole host of different people to make decisions about therapies or interventions. So, for example, it might help patients decide, what kind of treatment they're interested in based on the data that's out there. It might help healthcare providers help select different treatments for different patients based on, their own circumstances. Healthcare providers and others actually use clinical trial data to develop guidelines that are used to treat people with different conditions or diseases. The data from clinical trials helps our regulators, so it helps the European Medicines Agency, the Food and Drug Agency in the US, the Canadian Drug Agency, helps them make decisions about what's safe and effective in people, helps policymakers make decisions about what becomes widely available and what becomes, on the market for people, so to speak. And it also helps policymakers and decision makers decide what might be covered if you're within a healthcare system where different treatments are provided to different people, or insurance companies, what they're going to cover as well. So the data that clinical trials provides can be used by a whole bunch of different people for a number of different reasons, might even help sponsors or the people running studies decide if they're going to continue studying an intervention or they're not going to, or if they're going to bring it to market or they're not going to. So I always kind of think of clinical trials sort of in my own little space, right? About some of the medications that I take for my arthritis, but that same data has impacted a whole host of other people and decisions that they've made about that medication that I take also. I'm not going to spend too much time going into detail about all of the different phases of clinical trials. I'm just going to kind of talk through these a little bit. One thing to note is that before any intervention is tested in people, it's often studied for a number of years in the lab, maybe in cells, maybe in blood samples from people, maybe in animals. It's studied in a number of different ways before it is kind of gated to be studied in people. And so we have generally a good idea about how an intervention should work in people, but we don't actually know until it's tested in people. And so the folks who are in phase 1 studies are often taking a different kind of risk than people who are participants in subsequent phases of clinical trials. So phase 1 studies are sometimes called first in human. They are often in healthy individuals, but in the cancer space, they might be in people with a specific type of cancer. They generally look at a really small number of people. Those people are monitored really closely because this is the first time that the intervention has gone into people. And sometimes, depending on the area of study, you might see the phases combined. So sometimes you'll see a phase 1-2 study, or you might see things presented a little bit differently. And again, that might depend on the condition that's being studied, if it's a rare disease, if there's not many participants, all those kinds of things. So even though something starts in phase 1, based on what happens in phase 1 for a variety of reasons, it may or may not go on to subsequent phases. If it does go on to a phase 2 study, that is generally, so phase 1 studies are generally looking at safety, a bit about dosing. Phase 2 studies, if the phase 1 study wasn't done in people with the condition for which the therapy is intended, this is when it will be with participants who live with that condition. Here, the researchers are usually looking at, does the intervention do what it's supposed to do? And again, continuing to monitor safety and look at dosing information. Generally looking at larger numbers of people, again, depending on the condition. If the intervention does continue on in the clinical trial pipeline and makes it to phase 3 studies, you'll sometimes hear these called randomized controlled trials. And that's generally when you're looking at 2 interventions compared to each other. So for example, if there's a standard of care in the disease area, it might be this new intervention against the standard of care. And when you hear that people have been randomized, it means exactly that they've been randomized to receive one intervention, maybe no intervention or another intervention. And that randomization is done to decrease the bias in interpreting the data that comes out of these studies. Depending on what happens in the phase 3 studies, in Canada, the sponsor can apply to Health Canada to have the intervention formally approved so that it can become widely available to people. And phase 4 studies happen sometimes and don't happen all the time, but that's when something is available on the market. And so now the intervention is widely available for many people. Again, depending on the disease area, like if you think of vaccines, maybe it's available in tens of thousands of people at this point. And sometimes there's things that happen when interventions go into really large numbers of people that weren't seen in the other phases of the clinical trials. So there's some good examples of that happening where after something has been approved, maybe the labeling has been changed, so the dosing changes, or it's not as widely available because of some of the things that have happened when the intervention has gone on into a really large population of people. And phase 4 studies also help us really look at the very long-term effects of treatments on people as well. So that's just kind of a general overview of sort of what you can expect with respect to each of the phases of clinical trials. So again, each of them is kind of designed to understand a specific thing or a few specific things about the intervention. And just because something does start in the clinical trial pipeline for a variety of reasons, it may or may not become widely marketed and available. That could be because of budget of the sponsor. It could be that the data didn't turn out as they were intended to. It might be a number of different reasons. So I'm going to move on now to finding a clinical trial, if that's of interest to people, and just so that you can understand what some of the options are out there and understand some of the terminology that's out there as well, if you start to look for things on your own. So there's no one way to find a trial if that's something that you're interested in. One option might be to talk to your healthcare provider, probably your specialist, in the case of pancreatic cancer. In the oncology space, trials are often a little bit more familiar to providers than in some other spaces. So that might be a good option to start with, is to explore with a healthcare provider. I know Erin was talking earlier about some of the programs that Craig's Cause has that can also help you find trials and sort of guide you along the way and support you along the way. And there's other organizations that also offer some similar programs. So that's another option for you. And maybe if you're not super open with your healthcare provider, that might be a better place to start, and then take that to your healthcare provider and have a conversation. If you live close to a hospital or maybe a research institute or another organization that does research, sometimes they will have people who can also help you navigate clinical trials there. So, for example, I live in Toronto, and Princess Margaret Cancer Centre does have a so-called clinical trials navigator who can help you out. They've got some contact information. You can reach out to them and see, and they're probably going to keep things specific to Princess Margaret Cancer Centre, but they'll have a whole host of information for you, and that's their job, to help answer questions for you too. There are legitimate ads in newspaper, TV, and radio. Those are often for phase 1 studies, and you might hear them offer compensation to be involved in those studies. So you might recall that when I was talking earlier, phase 1 studies are also called first in human. They are studies where it's the first time the intervention has been used in people. And so those participants are seen as taking a larger risk than others in subsequent studies. And they can be offered rather large sums of money to participate in studies. That often means they're at a specific site being monitored as well. They have to, not always, but often, and they maybe have to undergo, specific tests. They have to respond to diaries and surveys and all that kind of stuff. So those can be legitimate. They're worth kind of checking out and asking questions about as well. You can also use Clinical Trials Ontario's Clinical Trial Finder. It pulls from a larger database that's based in the US, but that has a lot of global studies in it. And that's under the auspices of the National Institute of Health in the US. And that is www.clinicaltrials.gov. We're going to go there in a minute as well, because Erin has helped me pull up a trial, and we're kind of going to take a look at things through that too. CTO's Clinical Trial Finder does pull from clinicaltrials.gov, but it will only pull out trials that are in Canada. You can look at trials from there based on where you are in Canada, but again, it's only going to pull up studies in Canada. And I know that sometimes people look to other places to participate in clinical trials as well. So those are some options. Those might be some good places to start your search if that's of interest to you. So another thing I get asked quite often is, but how do I know if clinical trial is a good one for me? Or how do I know if it's reputable or credible? So those are important questions, and I can help you out with some of the reputable and credible things. But ultimately, it's a really personal decision to participate in a clinical trial. And that's going to have to be your decision, although you might lean on a lot of different perspectives and do a lot of homework before you make that decision. One of the important things about trials is that the costs of the clinical trial will be covered. Not all of them will be covered, but you should not be asked to pay for the study treatment. That's a really, really big red flag. If you're being asked to pay for the study treatment, or if there's like some kind of fee to participate in the study, another giant red flag. You might have to cover things like travel, which can be onerous if you're coming from far away, maybe parking. If you're there for the day, maybe food, maybe you have to take time off work. If you have kids, maybe you need help with them. But those are things you should also ask the study team if there's any supports that they can provide you that maybe aren't listed. And I would encourage you, if you're interested in a trial, to reach out to the study team and actually ask questions. I think that they'll have a lot of good information about the study online, but I would encourage you to not make assumptions about things you don't see there. And I would rather have you reach out to the study team and ask lots of questions before you make decisions about things. You should be satisfied with the qualifications of the trial team. We all use Google a lot, right? So are these people known, in your space in terms of maybe studying pancreatic cancer or, treating people with different pancreatic conditions? Maybe they're affiliated with a credible center, or maybe they're academics. Not everybody has to be an academic who's a trialist, but do some homework. And, do you feel like they are qualified from your perspective and where you're coming from? So for clinical trials that are happening in Canada, they must be reviewed by our regulator. They must be reviewed by Health Canada. It is okay to ask the trial team about that. Anyone who's running a legitimate trial should not be put off by that question. In fact, they should be impressed that you know that and that you're doing your homework. The other thing is that the clinical trial will have to have been reviewed and approved by a research ethics board. And the research ethics board looks at a clinical trial from the view of the participants and their safety and their well-being throughout the study. So again, that's another totally legitimate question for you to ask is, can you share with me which research ethics board, or for those of you in the US, sometimes they're called IRBs, institutional review boards. That's a fair question to ask. The institution or organization where the trial is happening also takes on a liability, and they take responsibility for the trial happening at their center. So they will have also reviewed and approved the study. So those are all completely legitimate questions to ask about who's reviewed and approved the study. The other thing, though, is even if you're satisfied with those things, you have to meet what's called the eligibility criteria to be in the clinical trial. And we're going to go over that a little bit next. And that's kind of like, I hate to call it the qualifications, but it's kind of the list of things that you need to have to be able to participate in the study. And that's been set out to really design the study well. So what are eligibility criteria? As I mentioned, it's like the set of qualifications that determines whether or not a trial is right for you. So it might be a disease or condition. So it might be a specific type of pancreatic cancer. It might be that you have to live near or in a specific location. And that might be because of the site schedule or what that looks like. So those are important things to look at when you're interested in a study. And we're going to look at an actual study right now that's recruiting, and I'm going to go over those with you in terms of where you can look to find what the eligibility criteria is. You'll see things that are called inclusion criteria, and those are characteristics that are needed to be part of the clinical trial. So for a cancer clinical trial, that might be specific genetic characteristics, or it might be being on a specific type of medication. There's also something called exclusion criteria, and like the name implies, those are the things that would exclude you from participating in the trial. Oftentimes, pregnancy is one of those exclusion criterias, or maybe having another comorbidity is also an exclusion criteria. And again, these are set up so that they help really ensure that the researchers and the trialists who are running the study can be sure that what they're seeing is because of the therapy itself, and they can make really strong conclusions about that. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at a trial that's currently recruiting. I want to make it very clear, we are not promoting or endorsing this specific study. We've pulled it up so that we can do a demonstration for you about what things look like when you get to one of these databases to look for a clinical trial. I'm not affiliated with the study team at all. I can't answer specific questions about the study, but we thought it was a good way to really make it concrete for you about when you're looking for a trial, what things actually look like within some of these databases. So I'm going to stop sharing my slides, and I'm going to take you to clinicaltrials.gov. So just give me 1 second here so that I can make sure I pull up the right thing for you to be looking at. Okay. Okay, so I'm just going to make this a bit bigger. If you type in clinicaltrials.gov and you're going to look at finding a study, this is what it will look like. So clinicaltrials.gov is kind of this, it's not kind of, it is a database where researchers and trial teams will put their studies so that it's kind of like so that they can share the studies with other people. And it's also a bit of a form of legitimacy. When they will want to publish on the results later, it's really important that they've been public about so-called registering their clinical trial and putting it out there in the world as well. So clinicaltrials.gov, lucky for us, has changed quite a bit in the last few years, and it's a little bit nicer to navigate through. If you want to see all the ugly bits of clinicaltrials.gov, and this might be something that Erin and her colleagues at Craig's Cause look at, they would go to the expert search. So that's where you can look at a bunch of different things. But probably for most people's purposes, these are kind of the main filters that you would look at. So probably at the very least, you look at the condition or disease you're interested in. You can add some other keywords. If you know about what the intervention or treatment is, you can put that in as well. And you can also put in the location. For study status, if you're looking to participate in a study, you're probably wanting to look at studies that are recruiting or not yet recruiting means they should be shortly. So these are things that will become available later. All studies might be things that are recruiting, things that have closed to participants. So, I mean, you can look at those as well, but probably if you're looking to participate in a study, you want to hit the recruiting button. You don't have to fill in all of these things, but my guess is at the very least, you're going to fill in the condition or disease. And there's a few other filters here too, like you can put in some parts of eligibility criteria. If you're a so-called healthy volunteer, you can put that in. If you're interested in a specific phase, you can put those types of things in too. So you can search around and dig around the site. Like I said, they've made it look a lot nicer in the past few years, so it's a lot easier to navigate as well. So Erin and I had a conversation about a trial to show you. Again, not endorsing this, not part of the study team. It's really about just sharing an example with you. So if you were to key in pancreatic ductal carcinoma in Canada, this is one of the studies that would come up. And so we're just going to kind of walk through this a little bit. So you'll see at the top, this is a study that's recruiting. So it's open to participants. It tells you who the sponsor is here, and it's got a name. And it's also got that this physician is associated with London Health Sciences Centre Research Institute. So this is an academic trial that's happening. It's not being sponsored by a pharma company. For some people, that's a big deal. For others, it's not, but it tells you right up front here. It tells you that they last posted, and it's really up to the study team to keep the information about the study on this site up to date. This group last posted in January about the study. So the first tab is study details, which is probably what you're most interested in. And on this page, there's a number of different things that we'll look at. We'll just scroll down the page, but if you're interested, you can click on one of these and it takes you to that part of the page. So we'll go back to the study overview. So this is an interesting type of science. This is where they're looking to study oral fecal microbiota transplantation with gemcitabine and nab-paclitaxel chemotherapy as first-line treatment. So fecal, they're doing poop transplants basically with people, right? And this is a really interesting area of science. We can laugh and, you know, joke about it, but it's been an interesting area of science for a while now, where they essentially, and again, I'm not an expert, but they're going to change your microbiome, and sometimes that can really affect the health of individuals. So if we look on the side here too, the study just started this year in January. They are thinking it's going to be about 3 years to complete this. You can see on this side, they're hoping to enroll 20 people. So it's not a lot of people, which probably tells you it's a phase 1 study. And bingo, it's a phase 1 study. And this is an interventional trial. So they're looking at how this particular intervention is going to affect people who are being treated with gemcitabine and paclitaxel chemotherapy, and who live with pancreatic ductal adenocarcinoma. So might not be the study for everybody, but you know, some people might be really interested in this. Then there's a bit of a description here. So this is a phase 1 study. It's open labeled and it's non-randomized. So open labeled means that you would know as a participant and the researchers know what you're getting in the study. Everybody's getting the fecal microbiota transplant from healthy donors. And the participants in the study are being treated with standard of care. And this is the type of adenocarcinoma that they have. So they're looking for 20 people to be treated. And here you see the purpose of the trial. It's to confirm the safety of their so-called FMT therapy with the standard of care, and to look at the clinical outcomes of these individuals. They're going to do what's called gut microbiome analysis. So they're going to look at how your gut microbiome has changed. They're going to look at immune profiling, and they're also going to explore so-called patient-related outcomes. This trial is being conducted at the London Health Sciences Centre. And then here's the official title. And I always find it really interesting how they have an official title and somehow they've come up with this acronym of Chase PDAC. So you may hear about the study from the acronym itself as well. So that tells you a bit about like the kind of overview of the study itself. It tells you what the intervention or treatment are. So in addition to essentially this stool therapy, there's also PEG therapy, gemcitabine, and nab-paclitaxel. And I believe the PEG therapy is basically, it's like having a colonoscopy. It's going to flush you out before you take the FMT therapy. They've got different links that are provided here as well. They've got contacts of who you can contact if you're interested in this. So the physician who is the study contact has his office phone number and his email. So that would be who you would ask any questions of if you've got questions. And it's happening in London, Ontario. Next, we go to the participation criteria, and they've actually got a nice definition about eligibility criteria. And we can look at the eligibility criteria, which include inclusion criteria as well as exclusion criteria. So these are the list of things you need to have to participate in this study. And then the exclusion criteria is if you have any of these things, you're likely not eligible for the study. But again, when you're interested in a study and you think that you've got the inclusion and the criteria for it, and you're okay with the exclusion criteria, you would approach the study team about it, and they would screen you before ensuring that you're actually eligible to participate in the study too. So, once you think you've met the eligibility to be in it, you would definitely have a conversation with the study team about this. So this is looking for adults. It's people over 18. They're studying it in men and women. And this is actually a phase 1 study that is not looking at healthy volunteers. It's looking at people in the population of interest here. So they just kind of highlight some of those. And then there's a larger description about this. So people have to be over 18. They have to have a confirmed diagnosis, and they spell out what that actually looks like here. They say that people need to have an ECOG performance of 0 to 2. They also have to have consented to treatment with first-line gemcitabine and nab-paclitaxel at the discretion of their primary oncologist. And they have to have received at least 1 dose of both to participate. Participants would have to be able to provide written informed consent and understand potential infectious risks associated with this FMT administration. And that would be part of the actual consent process itself. So you don't have to know these risks up front, but you would be able to look at the informed consent, ask lots of questions, and then agree to providing written informed consent. Again, they're saying that people have to understand there are also non-infectious risks associated with receiving the FMT administration. Again, that would be spelled out in the informed consent form. You take the FMT therapy as capsules, so it's oral capsules, so you have to be okay ingesting those. Have to understand that there's not a lot of long-term safety data associated with this type of intervention, and have evaluable disease as per RECIST version 1.1. And then it goes on to say too that patients may also receive other localized therapy with palliative intent. So you'd have to look at that too. So then we go on to the list of exclusion criteria. So these are the things that would make you ineligible to participate in the study. So if you've received other cytotoxic chemotherapy with curative or non-curative intent for your disease, we talked about this before. If you're pregnant or breastfeeding or expecting to conceive, that would not make you eligible. Have a diagnosis of immunodeficiency, so that might impact the results of the study, such as HIV or organ transplantation. If you've got ongoing antibiotic use within or prior to the FMT procedure. And it tells you that you have to discontinue any probiotic supplements and food products labeled as containing probiotics. So I'm going to assume that's even things like yogurt that are considered probiotic. And again, the study team would go over that with you. If you have specific types of chronic intestinal disease like celiac, colonic tumors, etc. And if you've got the presence of things that would so-called contraindicate that you should receive FMT therapy. So toxic megacolon, severe allergies, inflammatory bowel disease. These are things that would also make you ineligible. Also, different diseases you'll see here, which would exclude you from the study. If you have an infection that requires systemic therapy, if you've received a live vaccine recently, that's going to make you ineligible also, and substance abuse disorders as well. And then they've got some other things here too. So you can see sometimes these lists are quite lengthy. And again, if you're not too sure about some of these, it's probably a good idea to have a conversation with someone on the team if you're interested in those things to help you understand some of those for sure. So then if we continue down, it's got some information about the study plan, like how the study was designed. So if you're a nerd like me, this stuff's super duper fascinating, but we're not necessarily going to go through all of this. I will tell you what the study's actually measuring as well. So that might be super helpful for you. This one's, this one's primarily focused on the safety, right? So adverse events in people and what kind of complications ensue. And then they've got some secondary outcome measures as well, which are a little bit more related to the disease that they're studying. Again, it tells you if there's any collaborators. It gives you some information about the study record dates as well. So those types of things. So lots of juicy information within these studies that is laid out in a fairly nice way, I think. And like I said, CTO also has a trial finder. If you're interested in using it, you would go to our website, you would go under resources, and you would go to find a clinical trial. And just like clinicaltrials.gov, it's made fairly easy in terms of what you have to put in. And really, at the very least, you have to put in your condition that you're interested in. You can leave location wide open, or you can change it to be all of Canada if you're in Canada. And those are kind of the basics that you have to fill out. But the clinicaltrials.gov one is quite a bit better than it used to be, a lot easier to go through. So I hope that was kind of helpful for you. I'm going to go back to my slides just for a couple of minutes to go through a few more things as I wrap up, and then I'm happy to take any questions that you might have as well. So let's just say, you found a study you're really interested in. You might be asking some questions about the inclusion and exclusion criteria. These might be some other questions that you think about asking. And we sort of went over some of this information already, the first thing is like, are you actually eligible, right? You might be interested, like I said, in who's funding the study or who the study physician is, the kind of tests that might be involved, the time that they take, where that actually happens, how often you'll have to do site visits, or can some things be done closer to home or even virtually? What's your responsibility in terms of reporting things that happen? Is there a study diary? Are there surveys, and what do those look like? Will you see your own doctor still during the clinical trial? Is there a chance I might receive placebo? When there's standards of care that are available, providing a placebo as a comparator is not considered ethical. So that's probably not going to be the case here, but again, worth asking if that's something that you're concerned about. There's nothing wrong with asking. And potential benefits and potential risks that are known. There might also be some that aren't known, right? And some of those might be uncovered during the trial. We went over in the trial that we showed you, it had listed about how long they think the study will be happening for. But that's generally like from start to finish with all the 20 participants that they're recruiting. So you might ask, like, the study might be open for longer because they're actually still recruiting individuals for the study. So you might ask how long your participation would actually last for, how many people, what kinds of out-of-pocket costs are there? And again, sometimes there are organizations that can help offset costs, or sometimes the trial itself has the budget to offset some of your costs. I'm thinking about how it personally impacts you, whether you're working, whether you have stuff going on with your family, but those are important considerations as well. We'll talk a little bit later. There are other choices besides participating in a trial, and you should think about those carefully. You want to know who your contact is and how you contact them. There will be a 24-hour contact, but that's really important for people. And if the treatment's beneficial, can I stay on it? Is it still available? And again, maybe even when the trial finishes up, is there any short-term or long-term follow-up? So again, I'll share these slides with Erin. This information is also on CTO's website. And those might just be some of the things that you ask. Everybody's got their own situation and things that are important to them. So do make sure that you think about the kinds of questions you want to ask. And again, the trial team will be more than happy to answer those questions with you. Some people want to know if the results from the trial will be shared with them as well. And that could be an important question for you. So if your healthcare provider does offer you a trial, you don't have to go ahead and accept the trial or be in the trial. And that's important to know. So there shouldn't be any coercion from that perspective, and that won't impact your care. So your care is separate from you being in a trial, and that shouldn't change your relationship with your healthcare provider. As I mentioned earlier, there might be other options. Maybe that's receiving no treatment. Maybe it's waiting to participate in a different study. Maybe it's changing treatments if there are different treatments that are available to you. And again, those are things you should talk about with whoever you trust, whether that's your family, whether that's a healthcare provider, it might be a doctor, it might be a nurse at the clinic that you go to. I just really encourage you to do your homework and, ask the people that you think you can get good information from to help you make decisions like this. Sometimes you can't find a trial that's near you, or, it's not the right one for you. Sometimes you can, if there's a clinical trial that's not near you, still participate in it. And so it's worth asking, if you're really interested in a trial, what that might look like. And again, what resources that might take and which resources you would have to be responsible for. There are ways to advocate and bring trials closer to you. I'm not going to lie, that's probably not the easiest way to get into a clinical trial, but I've seen people actually do that where they've helped bring trials to centers that are closer to them. And again, you might wait. So something, for example, that comes to US center might come to a Canadian center just a little while after it's opened at a US center. So there's the opportunities that things do come closer to home. So just want to highlight again that participating in a clinical trial is voluntary. You providing consent to participate is up to you. And you removing that consent at any time is also up to you, and that's okay. Consent is also not just a piece of paper that you sign saying that you understand potential risks and benefit, what it looks like to participate. Consent is actually ongoing, and that's you as a participant really understanding what's happening in the trial, what your role and responsibilities are, and that's the trial team, giving you that information or you asking about that information. If you do decide to withdraw from a trial, you can request that any samples or any data that you provided to the study also be removed. That may or may not be possible for a number of reasons, but you can certainly ask the trial team about that. All the potential benefits and risks for clinical trials will be different. It'll really depend on what the study is. And again, I can't emphasize enough how much it's up to you to decide if you feel the potential benefits will outweigh the potential risks. Those potential benefits and risks will be listed in the informed consent form. Again, you should ask the trial team lots and lots of questions about those so that you can make an informed decision. Again, you can choose to leave a clinical trial at any time for any reason. You don't have to provide a reason. You'll probably be asked to give some insights as to why you left the trial or why you're deciding to leave the trial. And again, that's up to you to decide if you'd like to share that information. I would encourage you, though, if you are deciding to withdraw from a trial, to ask questions and to have a conversation with the study team before you do so. There might be ways that you can still participate if it's like logistics that aren't working out for you, etc. Maybe it's worth a conversation to ask how things might be done a little bit differently given your situation and seeing if that's even a possibility. The other reason to have that conversation versus just ghost the trial team is it's for your own safety. So depending what kind of trial you're in, you may be asked to do some tests before you stop with the intervention that you're being given, or to make sure that you can withdraw safely. So really encourage you to be open and transparent about things so that you can, if you still decide to withdraw from the study, be removed as safely as possible from the study. And again, you can ask for, things associated with your participation to be removed from the study, but for a number of reasons, the team may or may not be able to do that. And, they'll be as honest with you as they can be about that. So I'll just reiterate, really everything I've talked about is, except for going, through that actual study itself, everything else is on our website. We've developed it in collaboration with lots of folks like yourselves who are interested in trials or who have participated themselves in trials. And I'm always really happy for you to contact me after the fact. If I can't answer your question, I'm happy to get an answer for you. So that's my information there. And just want to thank you for taking, a good hour out of your day to listen to me. And I'm happy to stay a little bit later to answer any questions that you have too, because I realized I went through a lot of information, and if you want to stay, I'm happy to stay on and answer any questions that you might have. So thanks a lot.
That's awesome. Thank you so much, Dawn. That was such a great presentation. I think really provided a lot of insight. So to get started, had sent me a question. Trials are for all stages. Is there more trials for one stage over others?
That's a good question. I can't tell you offhand. I would have to look at the data that's out there to let you know where things are at. But I can tell you, like in Canada, there's thousands of trials happening at any one time. So I just can't tell you which phase things are in. Yeah.
Totally. Said thank you for such a wonderful presentation. And then it said after a new cancer drug is approved, is the drug company required to do a phase 4 trial to determine the patient's experience with the drug?
That's a great question. They're not required to do so. In Canada, there are some companies that will do that because they are interested, or they will often there will often be, for some drugs, there will be what's called patient support programs, where the sponsor continues to remain really involved in how people get access to that medication, and then they will often ask lots of questions. So, for example, I can tell you in this space that impacts me, the rheumatoid arthritis space, there are infusion clinics and there are special clinics that people have to go to for specific drugs. And so there are examples of sponsors with a lot of information about those drugs post-market, so phase 4 studies, and they will publish on that. They will do all kinds of things with that information. So it's not a requirement. The other thing, just to let you know about too, is in Canada, Health Canada has the ability for individuals, so like you and I, if we have experiences with medications and we want to report a specific side effect that we've experienced, you can do that online. And chances are your physician or your specialist also will. So Health Canada kind of has this, for lack of better words, database of at what's called adverse events or side effects that have happened. And that is part of how they can track what's happening with medications in the long term. So that's not exactly a phase 4 study, but there are ways that once things come to market, that things can kind of continue to be tracked outside of whoever the sponsor was that did the original studies. And it, again, sometimes has an impact on how those medications then are used. So there are examples of things being pulled from shelves because of people's experiences once they've come to market, or there are things that have been changed in terms of what their indications are and who can actually access them, because of some of the things that have happened with the so-called long-term safety and effects of drugs after they've come to market, if that makes sense.
Great. Yeah, that's super interesting. Are there any other questions? Feel free to either unmute yourself or write it in the chat. Okay. Amazing. Well, thank you so much, John. This was such a great presentation. I think it was really informative and really helpful to learn more about clinical trials and sort of how to apply for them and sort of I think it was really helpful to walk through the to walk through the
Example?
trial. Yeah, I think that was so
Yeah.
helpful.
Yeah,
Um,
because I mean, I can kind of talk about it, but until you like look at, what you would be looking at when you're looking for a trial, it sometimes doesn't solidify what it actually looks like, right?
Totally,
Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah, no, I think that's super helpful. And yeah, definitely please use Dawn's website, the Clinical Trials Ontario. That's fantastic. Use our program, whatever. It's all great and it's all just getting just making sure that you know what all your options are. So I think that's really great. Oh, and Dawn just put her email in the chat there if anyone needs it. Otherwise, yeah, I think that is all if there's no more questions. Thank you everyone so much for being here. Dawn, thank you so much for your time today and for sharing all this information. It was super, super helpful. Really appreciate it. And yeah, if anyone needs anything, you can always send me an email, erin@craigscause.ca, ERIN. And sorry, I have a little bit of a cold right now, so I might sound a little bit stuffy. But yeah, so please feel free to email me if you need anything. If you didn't take down Dawn's email address and a question comes up, just let me know and I'm happy to forward it on to her as well. And we can do that.
Awesome.
That's great. Well, thank you so much, Dawn. Really appreciate your time
Yeah.
today.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks everyone so much for coming and have a great rest of your weekend.